Hey, and welcome back to Talos Principle. Last time we solved our puzzles and then my camera broke, which is why we are here again. I had to re-log into the game, and this time around we're going to read what is on the secret terminal. It's somewhere in the back here. Let's see if I can still remember where I found that last time. Wasn't it like just around here? I think so. Just because we obviously skipped that last time. Again, I'm curious what they are still, what I still have left to tell us. But then again, like, we are only halfway through the game at this point, apparently, which I am still, on one hand, very surprised about, on the other hand, very happy about. Anyway, accessing communication terminal. We still have a friend, a new one. Attention, administrator. The network connection has been re-established. Would you like to reconnect to the previous session? Sure. Receiving message as a string. Message. Are you back? Yeah, what were you trying to say before? Yes, do these terminals talk to you at all? Yes, but how do I know I can trust you? I'm curious about what they said, but we could probably be... Let's start with the obvious. I feel like that's like more important, like to me personally. I don't remember, doesn't matter. So relatable, my friend. I've been trying to figure out how this place works. Sometimes it seems like there's a purpose to everything, other times not so much. I somewhat understand that, yeah. I think we must be plugged into some kind of machine. I think something else is going on. No, I do agree with the machine. What do you have to go on? Making assertion is a hazardous enterprise. So here's the thing. I agree with the machine part, maybe not with the plugged in part, because that implies that we are something from outside of the machine. If we are just like an AI that was made inside of the machine, then we were never plugged in, right? Unless, previous, assertion that I had that we are still ourselves plugged into this machine. In which case, obviously, the plugged in part would be correct. But I would say, like, what do you have to go on? That's like the important question. What else could possibly explain all this? I don't believe in demons and evil wizards. I feel like your experience is somewhat different. I think there's some kind of punishment. I think we're being prepared for something. I think something has gone badly wrong. Perhaps you have it right after all. I don't believe in anything anymore. Okay, here's the thing. I don't think that this is a punishment. Like, why would it be a punishment, right? And obviously this is a weird question, maybe, but I would assume some sort of suffering, but we are always like congratulated, even by Elohim, that, figuring stuff out is kind of fun, right? Like this like they're talking about like the bliss, or like there was like something Elohim explicitly said about how, this experience brings you like closer to him or something like that. I don't quite remember. It's been like 20 episodes since I last heard that sentence, but something along those lines. So I don't think this is really punishment. I also wouldn't know for what. Like, maybe I'm too rational for this, but I feel like punishment without understanding for what you're being punished is kind of counterproductive. In a way. Unless it's just like for some, weird... Well, let's call it like some fun from like some outsider, right? That they're watching us and they're just enjoying our suffering. In that sense, maybe. But otherwise, I don't really see the punishment angle here. I think something's gone badly wrong. I do agree with that. I still kind of believe that the idea was that like an AI is supposed to like kind of surpass, or at least like reach the level of humans and then get like let out by leaving the tower, but Elohim kind of wants us to not do that, and Elohim is like kind of the caretaker of this whole thing, right? This was like a previous theory that I had, and maybe Elohim has kind of gone a bit rogue. Probably wasn't called Elohim in the beginning. It's like my theory, right? Like kind of grew mad with power. Perhaps you have it right after all. Maybe, and I feel like we are we being prepared though? Prepared for what? This is like actually an interesting thing about this. Like, we have all of these puzzles, and we also have like the terminals. Like the terminals, reading those, they weirdly enough like they do feel kind of like a human activity, right? Like reading through those and understanding all of that stuff, and maybe are able to, like, using that we might be able to figure out if we are actually a person, right? Like I can at least see some angle there. Not clearly still, because we are mostly just getting like lore drops here. And while there is like the certification program, that didn't really test us too much on whether we are human or not. But like the puzzles themselves, I feel like you don't need to be human to solve those puzzles. Which sounds like maybe weird, but like you could just throw in like a random program, like something doing random actions constantly, and it's going to be solved at some point. You could have a machine in there that does not I know it's like always weird. I like using the word soul sometimes even for that, to kind of describe like the humanity in there, like the personhood. Even though, like, again, I mentioned this before, that I don't really see too much of a difference between like the machine and us, even though we do put more value on human life. I hope we all do that. Like, I hope I'm not reaching here. But like, if you're being very, very rational, then you wouldn't probably value the human life over like all other lives and like even objects in a way, which sounds really funny. Maybe it's just because we have nice faces. I don't know. Like, it's why people generally feel like more of a connection to things with a face, for example. I feel like if you had a robot that looked human, like mostly human, like for example the robots that we are currently playing, right? Like we are vaguely humanoid. I feel like it's a lot easier to see a person that one than, for example, like I guess like a cylinder that just drives around and hands you like some food or something like that. And even though those two could be like the same level of like sentience, if you want to call it that, or like at least machine intelligence. I don't know, why am I going on the tangent again? It's been a few minutes already. But yeah. I genuinely have forgotten why we started this tangent. But I don't know what we would be prepared for. Oh yeah, I remember. It was about like the puzzles and how they are supposed to prepare us. I do not know how collecting those sigils is preparing us for something. It is testing, I guess, a problem-solving ability. But as I mentioned before, since we are like the bazillionth iteration of everything that's going on here, like, you know, it's a monkeys and typewriter situation. At some point, it's going to solve it, whether we have like a human level here or not. I still feel like this is for something. We are being prepared for something. Maybe not prepared in the sense that we have to reach a certain level, but like, I guess you would still have that, right? Like, we are being tested, and maybe it's about... And maybe it's more about like getting prepared and breaking free of the shackles here? Because we still have like the tower that we have not checked out, right? I want to say that. Are you being prepared? I suppose that would explain a lot. Listen, I do like the typo here. Listen, there's something else. Maybe it can help us. Ever since I got here, I felt like something was wrong. This place plays tricks with you. With you. You can't get your head straight. But I think I know a way to find out the truth. I was digging about in some documents and I kept finding references to this password. Think it might be some kind of library master key, but I don't know how to use it. What is it? I mean, I technically can access some pieces of information here, right? Swear not to go anywhere without me. And I let you MLA process.bat logged into the session. Wait, what is that? Are you doing that to my terminal? I don't think that this is a good idea. MLA process.bat. Okay, it's really interesting that we do not see who we're typing to. Because this is like a message, right? Like, this is not a, I guess, a server-side message. We are just receiving something. Like, everything that's being sent to us is just written as like message, colon, and then whatever is coming there. I guess maybe the terminal exploded? But why would an MLA, this is the Milton Library Archive? I forgot what the shorthand was for, but yeah, something like that. Anyway, Hippocratic corpus. So what doctors, I'm guessing? Chesterton brain? Bronstein brain? Neuroscience? Okay, there's at least one word in there that I get. Let's start with the corpus here. On the sacred disease, 400 BCE. Some swear words. Men ought to know that from nothing else but the brain comes joys, delights, laughter and sports, and sorrows, grief, despondency and lamentations. And by this, in an especial manner, we acquire wisdom and knowledge, and see and hear, and know what are foul and what are fair, and what are bad and what are good, what are sweet and what unsavory. Some we discriminate by habit, and some we perceive by their utility. By this we distinguish objects of relish and disrelish, according to the seasons, and the same thing do not always please us. And by the same organ we become mad and delirious, and fears and terrors assail us, some by night and some by day, and dreams and untimely wanderings, and cares that are not suitable, and ignorance of present circumstances, desuetude and unskillfulness? Well, in any case, ignoring words that I don't know how to pronounce. Yeah, okay, I get it. I get the overall premise of the text. That's what I kind of want to talk about. Like the brain, like we are our brain, basically. Not fully interestingly enough. Like, okay, like we are our brain, let's start off with that. But like obviously our body still sends signals to our brain. And to my understanding, oftentimes to the point that it like kind of overrides it, right? A big part obviously would be a reflex that oftentimes like happens before you even get like the signal up to the brain, just because it's like too slow. Which is interesting, which means like, if you want to talk about it like that, we have like partial brains all over our body, right? But it's like one thing. The thing that I don't quite get is the title, On the Sacred Disease. Is the sacred disease like kind of the soul they talk about that's like inside of our brain? Maybe? I mean, they're also talking about like how you're becoming like useless at the end. How that's also part of that, but it's all about like how it all comes from the brain, which is interesting that this was talked about here. Like I remember seeing a video about that, and I'm gonna have to really loosely like talk about this here because I genuinely do not fully remember. It's been a few years since I saw that video, but it was about how the concept of self used to be connected to the heart more than the brain. At least like in like many parts of the Western world. Which is also like, I'm guessing at least that this is where something like learning something by heart comes from, like as an expression. It's not, you learn it by brain, for example. Or like you do what the heart wants. Stuff like that, even though everything that you are basically comes from your brain. Like you can replace a heart, like biologically, like with like some machine, and you would still be a human. Or like the same human. Presumably. But if I replaced your brain, then you would probably be someone else, even if like your body even worked at that point. So kind of fascinating that was like a conclusion they had in 400 BCE. I guess there were like some accidents that happened that explained that to them. I don't know. I just can't theorize here. Anyway, also why it's the Hippocratic corpus. Like, I'm thinking, like, reading the first word, I'm thinking of the oath, but maybe it comes from, like, another word, but maybe... I'm actually not sure where that word originally comes from, now that I think about it. Might have to Google that after the episode, obviously, but I'm now curious why the text is called that. Anyway, Chesterton brain. But interesting that we're talking about the brain here, like, in general. The human brain is a machine for coming to conclusions. If it cannot come to conclusions, it is rusty. When we hear of a man too clever to believe, we are hearing of something having almost the character of a contradiction in terms. It is like hearing of a nail that was too good to hold down a carpet, or a bolt that was too strong to keep a door shut. Man can hardly be defined, after the fashion of Carlyle, as an animal who makes tools. Ants and beavers and many other animals make tools in the sense that they make an apparatus. Man can be defined as an animal that makes dogmas. As he piles doctrine on doctrine and conclusion on conclusion in the formation of some tremendous scheme of philosophy and religion, he is, in the only legitimate sense of which the expression is capable, becoming more and more human. When he drops one doctrine after another in a refined skepticism, when he declines to tie himself to a system, when he says that he has outgrown definitions, when he says that he disbelieves in finality, when, in his own imagination, he sits as God, holding no form of creed, but contemplating all, then he is by that very process sinking slowly backwards into the vagueness of the vagrant animals and the unconsciousness of the grass. Trees have no dogmas, turnips are singularly broad-minded. Okay, that's a complex text. But I did like the beginning here. We're talking about when somebody's too clever, we're hearing of something having almost a character of a contradiction in terms. Because every other tool, if you're talking about a tool being too good, they are making the example with the bolt that was too strong to keep a door shut. That would never really be an issue, unless you want to open the door again, right? If a tool is perfect at its job, you have this bolt and it makes it so that the door can never be opened again unless you remove that bolt. Then it is perfect for the job, right? And we don't really have that same thing when it comes to humans. I wouldn't say you can be too smart, overall, but you can be too smart for a situation. I'm not saying that I am too smart as a person, but I like to overthink things, as you may have seen multiple times during this playthrough alone, where I just like to think further than the game or the situation at hand requires me to, which then in turn complicates it more for me, making the situation, or I guess the solution, not really reachable to me until I kind of step back and start again, from the very beginning. And we don't. Do we have that for tools? I mean, technically we have that for tools. If you have a screwdriver or a drill or something like that, you can drill too far, right? But would that be too good of a drill then? I feel like that would be a very inaccurate drill then. I feel like that wouldn't be too good a drill in that situation. I don't know. But that's, I guess, a definition thing. Otherwise, yeah, they're also talking about animals who use tools. To my understanding at least, the special thing about humans is that we don't just use tools, because there are a lot of other animals that do. Even if you're looking in the world of birds, for example, that understand basic physics to basically, for example, reach water in a bottle by just putting rocks in there to push the water up, which is really fascinating. But apparently humans are the only animals that use tools to create even better tools, which is something that's rather special about us. Obviously, there's also the thing that we understand language to an extent that most other animals don't, and I would say all animals probably, which allows us to, I guess, be better at teaching the next generation. And I'm not just saying in the next generation as our kids, but also the next generation of people who want to do the same work, for example, that we want to do, or learn the next, or the same thing that we have already learned. In that sense, the next generation. It's interesting that it's also talked about how, piling doctrine on doctrine and conclusion to conclusion, that we become more and more human, that we are becoming more smarter, I guess. In a sense, maybe? I can see at least where they're coming from, where oftentimes we have that throughout history, and we probably still have that sadly in our human in our current world, where especially cultures unlike the humans in those cultures, are like valued by their intelligence in a way. Seeing, oftentimes like the colonizers, for example, who went somewhere else and said like, hey, they are not as smart as us, they are not actually human like us. We had that in the text about like the Spanish people, who talked how, the people of the Americas aren't actually like on the same level as the other humans, because they, first of all, they are cannibals, but the other thing was that they can't even read. I think that was the argument they made, which goes in a similar sense, like obviously in the backward sense, that they were less human because they haven't reached like the same conclusions, for example. And that would also in turn mean, if we, go the other direction, that the better you are, like the smarter you are, the more human you are. And you would probably leave like all the other humans behind in a way. It's a very interesting way of thinking about that. But I am kind of struggling with like the rest. When I talk about like becoming more and more human, and then he does, or like the text talks about when he declines to tie himself to a system, when he says that he has outgrown definitions, system, that he disbelieves in finality. Like the reason why I'm not understanding is actually the end of it, because then he has that very process sinking slowly backwards into the vagueness of the vagrant animals and the unconsciousness of the grass. Saying that if you become like the text, I'm assuming at least what the text is trying to tell us, is that when you become too smart, right, like too human, that you kind of leave all the rest behind. Like without this system, I guess they also talk about like how the systems make you human. Like I'm not talking about like a physical systems, but like I guess also in a cultural sense. And because you're like so skeptical of everything, you're becoming so vague again. It's basically like a like the classic graph, like the. I don't want to say like bell curve. I guess like it's the same shape, but I'm not talking about like the actual association that we have sadly in our world. But I'm talking about like how you become more human and more human as you understand more, and then at some point you are getting so skeptical that you do not believe in that again, and then you go back on the other side. Basically, I am not really sure how I'm to interpret the text. I'll be completely honest here. But I do think that at least the first half, to my understanding at least, actually something interesting to think about. I don't think... Okay. I wanted to say I don't think that, becoming more smart means that you are becoming more human. I don't think that generally is the truth. But then you have to kind of think back, because we also have, like, again, the concept of evolution. At some point... we weren't humans, right? Like we evolved from there, being like some sort of, and like obviously not we ourselves, but obviously in the whole process being apes before, and we kind of became more human and human over time due to evolution. But it also is a very, I guess, hard to define topic, because what exactly makes us human? Like, as opposed to those, I guess, like, our ancestors that weren't, like, fully human. I mean, we kind of set arbitrary cut-offs, basically, because otherwise it's not possible, because evolution is such a gradual process. And you could, if you really wanted to, probably also make one in, like, more modern times, cut off like where our current humans are like just a few thousand years ago, if you wanted to, right? Like that's the whole thing about like the whole arbitrary nature of definitions that we have. And yes, I mean like that's generally most definitions that aren't like rooted in pure mathematics, for example, that they aren't fully clear because we have like too much of a blend in the real world. By that I mean, for example, like when is something walking, when is something running? Like, there are some rules to that. Like, for example, I think the rules that we, for example, use for walking is when you always have a foot on the floor while moving. But could you run like that? Like, when do you go, like, fast, for example? And when is it that's, like, running start or, like, jogging and stuff like that? They are, like, all... You could always get closer to the next point, for example, and... never really have a clean border between two definitions, for example. Which is why I said that they are somewhat arbitrary. And that's fine. Like, we just use definitions oftentimes to help us with language, to really communicate what we're talking about more than them having a clean use in that sense, like an objective use. Right, it's like why we don't put tomatoes in the fruit salad, right? But yeah, that's like a classic example. I don't know, I feel like I need to reread like the second part, maybe once I'm editing. That Bronstein? Brain? I don't know if I'm supposed to read that in a German way. Archive with a lot of numbers. Bronstein left David Dovich? And letters that you can read now. The human brain is a product of the development of matter and at the same time is an instrument for the cognition of this matter. Gradually it adjusts itself to its function, tries to overcome its limitations, creates ever new scientific methods, imagines ever more complex and exact instruments, checks its work again and yet again, step by step penetrates into previously unknown depths, changes our conception of matter without, though, ever breaking away from the spaces of all that exists. I mean, yeah. The brain is something physical, right? Like, it's a product of the development of matter. Due to evolution, we reach this point. It is still like a physical object that's kind of evolved over time. It's the instrument of cognition of this matter. Yeah, we are using our brain to label the brain as a brain. Yeah, we have done that. Gradually it adjusts itself to this function. I would argue yes. Like between generations. And I'm just gonna make like an assumption here. But I do believe that we as a human race have become smarter over the generations. Part of that is, to my understanding, just that due to industrialization we have like more food, which, you know, more nourishment for our brain is always good. But there's probably also the thing that generation to generation we are always expected to learn more in our childhood. And I am guessing that part of that is, especially like it has been quite accelerated over the last few decades, that our brain somewhat manages to do that, right? Like, if you think about the fact that, okay, how do I describe it? We are in school obviously taught more and more every year because there is just more to learn. Maybe not every year, but like overall. Like, if you go back 100 years in time, you probably would have learned less in school, even if you had like the same amount of time in there. And same if we look like back only 50 years and probably 25 years. There are always new things that you have to learn, due to like our understanding of a lot of the sciences especially changing. And still somehow kids manage to do that. Like, kids graduate somehow, even though they have to learn more in a shorter range of time. Which poses the question, could we have taken someone like who was born 100 years ago and basically put them into our current school curriculum, and would they have managed to also pass with like similar grades that they would have had 100 years ago? I think that's just an interesting thought experiment, but obviously a lot of what we are learning also is not just school related, but it also comes from our environment that constantly requires more and more attention from us. Like, look at the amount of, I guess, information we are constantly absorbing Like, if I go anywhere outside, there's probably a wall of text that I can find if I just look 50 meters ahead somewhere. And we are kind of just expected to know all that. And we kind of passively learn, in a way. I don't know, I might be too hung up on exactly this point, because I'm already running long and I have not even finished the third text here. Anyway, where was I? Creating more scientific methods, complex and exact instruments. That's true, yeah, we are doing that. To check the work again and again, and we are definitely breaching new horizons constantly when it comes to science, even though it doesn't seem that way necessarily to everyone. Like, I recently had to read a research paper for a class, which I found like really fascinating because it was like a really simple one. And this research paper was about episodic memory. You know how like it's a lot easier to remember stuff if you're like in the same environment that you learn it in. And it was about how VR can be used to enhance that. And the most interesting thing about that was actually that VR works inversely to how we would expect it. And it's like such a small research paper. Just a few years, I want to say old. I don't have the date in my head right now. But it's such a small thing. There was like research being put into that probably took a little bit of time. And even though this is like a very, very simple research paper, just asking the right questions and I guess questioning our assumptions and rechecking that kind of broadened the horizon. And this paper is one, like, I wouldn't know about that if I hadn't gone into like the course where I had to read it. So yeah, like we are constantly breaching new horizons. The only issue is that the horizon is like so large, it changed like that. This is like such a minor thing, such a specific thing that we have to put research into to put effort into researching to figure more stuff out. But there are like so many more bazillions of topics that you could have researched instead. And we don't have those kind of breakthroughs anymore that you hear about in history. Like, we do not need to discover gravity again. Okay, like the discovery of gravity is obviously something different to just the formula. But most things that humans interact with on the daily, we have kind of figured out how they work. Like in a physical sense. Like the forces that apply, and then we have also refined them. We talked about this before with like the laws of gravity, how they work by like mass attraction, and then we kind of figured out that it's more like the curvature of space-time, at least to our understanding. And this is why in the extremes the formula just kind of breaks apart like the original one, even though it seems to work like accurate enough in non-extreme cases. But yeah, that definitely changes our conception of matter. Not just matter, but like other concepts. And without ever breaking away from its basis of all that exists, which again is the matter. Like the brain hasn't actually changed that much if you think about it. Like I mentioned this before, that the thought experiment with if you take someone from like 100 years ago and could they learn the same thing that we learn here. But I would argue that there is very little that changed biologically on that brain. We are still basically the same brain, right? Like if you say like 100 years, like again, if you're doing like math with like around 25 years a generation, that's just like 4 generations ago. Like evolution takes millions and millions of years. Which kind of also implies, if this would be possible, what about like a person from like 1,000 years ago? Like imagine you robbed a child, like a newborn child from ancient Rome, and put them into our society, right? And they had them grow up here. How far would they fall behind of their peers? Would they even fall behind? And that's actually something, like we can't test that, sadly. I say sadly, but I guess for all the newborns in ancient Rome, they're probably quite happy about staying with their family. But I don't know, it's just something I'm now thinking about. How much of an effort, how much of an effect, I guess, the evolution of the brain has as opposed to like the societal one. But yeah, let's close that and go for the last text because it's getting long again. Neuroscience. Physiological history. Volunteers suffered a blood clot during infancy, which resulted in a left hemisphere stroke. Expected result: in normal adults, the left hemisphere is used for language and other cognitive functions. Extensive damage to this part of the brain usually results in severe cognitive deficiencies. Observed result: volunteer is now 17 years old and displays only very subtle cognitive deficiency. MRIs indicate little to no activity in the left hemisphere, suggesting its usual functions have been taken on by neuron sets in the right. Volunteer's age at the time of the stroke may have helped the brain to adapt. That's also something that I have heard multiple times, especially when they're like, let's call them birth defects or like injuries like in very young ages, where the brain is weirdly enough very capable of like rearranging itself and still, I guess, functioning in a way. Which also implies some weird thing, because normally they're talking about like how the language parts, like the left hemisphere of our brain. But why is that? Right? There's like no, to me at least, as someone who is not versed with biology in that field, why would the left hemisphere be better at that than, for example, the right? It seems to just be a random mutation that at some point happened, that certain parts of the brain were just used for certain things. Now the question is, how much of that is, I guess, a social component, how much of that is genetic? If we can assume that the brain can kind of rewire itself if there's like a defect. Like, what is stopping the brain to just like develop the other way around? I would assume that the synapses that we have in our brain work close enough that that should be fine. But again, not a professional in that field. But it is rather fascinating. There's like this one case I have heard about where there's like a person who basically had only half the brain developed as well. Similar to that, but the parts were just missing. It wasn't like a clot that developed, it was just like a smaller brain that developed. And there was like kind of a gap in there. And they just lived a normal life. They were like not as smart as like the average peer, but I mean, there are also people right now who are like below average when it comes to their intelligence, right? It's just how averages work. So how much like could that person have had like an above average intelligence? Obviously, measuring intelligence is kind of hard. Like, you can go for IQ scores, but they do not measure everything, right? I just want to know that here, but would that have been possible just by rearranging that thing? Like, they're not talking about this. They're just talking about the fact how the 17-year-old, like how different parts of his brain now work, but they don't add in here, like, for example, we're talking about language parts. Like, does this person have issues talking to a certain extent? Maybe they're struggling more than their peers? I don't know. Text doesn't really talk about it. But it is always interesting to think about. When it comes to the brain, like, the big issue is that we can't really make a lot of experiments here for a lot of ethical reasons, right? Like, you cannot just take a baby and, like, remove half the brain and see how they grow up. Like, you have to be, I guess, unlucky enough that that happens, and then you can kind of observe it, which makes brain research a little bit slower than certain other parts, because that doesn't happen that often. Hopefully. In any case, I've been rambling on for like way too long, probably 40 minutes this episode. I would say let's end it here. Interesting to see that there is apparently still something trying to stop us communicating with our new friend, which was like the beginning of the episode. I should probably still talk about that. And a lot of interesting things about the brain that are definitely above my brain quality, I guess. In any case, I would say thank you all for watching, and I wish you a wonderful rest of your day. I'll be seeing you next time. Till then, have a good one, and bye-bye.